start the panel now. We're lacking one speaker. Yes, see? Hello? Okay, so good morning, everyone, and thank you for being with us, and also for those who are following online in our panel titled Beyond Tokenism, Institutionalizing Meaningful Youth Participation. I'm Angel Perez. I'm head of International Affairs and Climate Action at the Spanish Youth Council, the organization that brings together youth organizations and young people in Spain, and which represents these youth organizations and young people before national governments, institutional representatives at the national level, and international global forums. First of all, I would like to thank the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Fundación Biodiversidad for offering this opportunity and space for dialogue, for reflection, and for engagement and contributions to the key topics that are to be tackled at this COP, positioning young people as youth organizations as an essential political actor in the response to the climate emergency. I would also like to thank and introduce today's speakers. Today we have Kailum Hederman, board member at the European Youth Forum, Marina Estrada, Spanish youth delegate in Generación Clima, also as part of the Spanish youth delegation, Isis Riquelme from Fundación Tremendas, and a climate activist from Chile. And right now, just in a couple minutes, Alexandre Pupo, Secretary General of the International Youth Organization for Iberoamerica, will be here with us. So yeah, thank you for being here with us. Young people care about our planet, our future, and our political systems. In the last decade, young people have initiated social movements tackling issues that impact our own lives and those of communities around the globe. We have done so with hope and optimism about the future at a time when we face extreme challenges in a world where global conflict, the climate crisis, and socioeconomic issues are becoming more critical than ever before. In a context where we need young people's fresh perspectives to guide political... Come on stage. In a context where we need these young people's fresh perspectives to guide political decision making, we continue to see an evident lack of diversity when it comes to the voices represented across our political systems, and very little political momentum or will to change the way things have been historically done. For too long, we have seen the same short-term decisions made by the same type of political representatives. To challenge the status quo and deliver the kind of solutions that will bring transformational change and accelerate progress, we need to ensure that political institutions truly represent the diversity of the people they seek to serve. This is especially true when it comes to youth representation and meaningful participation. While half of the world's population is under the age of 30, young people's voices are often among the least represented in the political institutions where decisions are made. Outside of electoral processes, other forms of political engagement are not welcoming either for young people. There is lack of trust between young people and political institutions and a growing perception, but not true, that political participation does not make a difference. Civic education is one important way to bridge this gap. However, not all young people have equal access to it, which often further disadvantages those who are in marginalized communities or groups. Additionally, young people are not a homogeneous group. We have diverse experiences and concerns and respond to them in many different ways. When discussing political participation or the lack of thereof, it is important to recognize that young people whose identity intersects with other vulnerable communities, indigenous people, people with disabilities, refugees and migrants, people from LGBTQI communities and women, they face additional challenges in gaining political influence and representation. As stated by the United Nations, youth are key to identifying new solutions that will secure the breakthroughs that our world urgently needs. As future citizens of this planet, we also stand to lose the most if societies become more insecure and more unequal, and also if the triple planetary crisis remains unabated. In recent years, young people have become a driving force for societal change through social mobilization, pushing for climate action, pushing for racial justice, promoting gender equality, demanding dignity for all, and fighting for climate justice. Young people also need safe spaces to voice our opinions and effect change. In places where there is limited space for youth participation in formal processes, young people have been there to protest, to speak out on the issues we care about. Our right to public protest should be respected, and at the same time, additional mechanisms should be fostered with informal institutions and processes. In addition to being a vulnerable group affected by the climate crisis, despite a popular narrative that young people are apathetic or uninterested in social, political, and civic issues, young people have proven to be drivers for change and agents for transformation. Youth movements have demonstrated a capacity for organization, for advocacy, and proposal to hold decision makers to account. We are speaking up against corruption, against for gender, racism, and socioeconomic inequality, while we organize social strikes and lead mass protests. Young people's actions have shifted the focus on political issues and are key drivers behind the level of attention that the climate emergency needs. Now I would like to give the floor to our speakers and invite our panelists to the discussion. So welcome also Alexandre Pupo is the Secretary General of the International Youth Organization for Iberoamerica. So thank you for joining us. And I'd like to open the floor asking, we often hear the concept having a seat at the table. But having a seat doesn't always mean that our voice is heard. What does a meaningful seat look for you? Is it about voting power? Is it about a veto power over decisions that affect our lives? Or is it about something else? So I don't know, Pupo, how you feel about intervening?
Thank you very much for the invitation, and gracias al gobierno de España también por abrir el pabellón para nosotros. My name is Alexandre Pupo, and I'm the Secretary General of the International Youth Organization for Iberoamerica, which is the only international organization dedicated to youth with this legal status, and is formed of the 21 Ibero-American states and represented by the youth authority of the government of each one of these states. And one of our roles is actually to represent the voices of the Ibero-American youth in the international stage, in international conferences. And we did a very interesting pre-COP in Brasilia 1.5 months ago. And what we discussed there, I think, has a lot to do with the role that we understand youth should have in these conferences, and especially when we think about the climate change and the COP30 ecosystem. And I want to add I think that each one of us will be giving a different perspective, and I'll be speaking a bit about finance, because I think finance is a very important tool to have a meaningful participation. When we were looking about the finance structure of the agreements and the funds that we have, we discovered that only 0.76% of all the finance in the world for climate finance is directed to youth-led organizations. And for that reason, we decided to launch a campaign that says 5% for youth, defending that youth need to have we already have a very important role in the implementation of the agreements. One of our initiatives as the OIJ, the International Youth Organism, was to map youth-led initiatives in the region, and we have mapped 170 youth local-based initiatives that are directly related to the implementation agenda of the COP. We do this to highlight that youth is already on the front line of the implementation of COP. As we discussed that this is a COP of implementation, it's important for us to highlight that we are already there. But we find that there is two gaps on that. The first gap is a gap of language. Youth in the territories that not necessarily related to the language of the discussions of the COP meetings, of the agreements, or even the action agenda. And for that reason, it's very important for us to translate that language to the local-based solutions that youth are doing on the territories, to showcase that we are the ones in the front line and we are already very important in this implementation. In the other hand, is actually to give enough structure to align and outline all these initiatives with the agenda, and for that it's very important for us to give more finance opportunities to these initiatives. So this is basically the agenda that we are defending on COP. Later today I'll be speaking on the plenary on behalf of the OIJ, and this is a bit what we are discussing. I want to highlight this part of finance because when we discuss meaningful participation, we talk a lot about how we can channel better the voices of youth in these conferences spaces. But I think we need to build real power from bottom up to show up in these conferences with more strength. And for that reason, I would highlight the part of financing youth initiatives as going beyond tokenism. And I will get to my conclusions remembering Felipe Paulier, our ASG for Youth, on the Conference of Future. He was discussing how youth feel themselves in these kind of international conferences. And the great majority of people answered about tokenism. We get to those places and we are like, there is a specific space for youth, there is one table for youth, there is one ASG for youth, there is one youth representative who can talk in the plenary, and this is not enough. I salute the government of Spain for having a youth delegation within their delegation. I think this is a very important step, and I think we'll have the opportunity to listen from the other speakers on other ways to have a meaningful participation. But from the side of OIJ, as an organism that represents the voices of youth in international conferences, we want to highlight the importance of financing youth in their actions in a way to strengthen our voices in these kind of spaces. Thank you, Angel.
Thank you for your intervention. And it's highly relevant what you just mentioned on trying to focus on how we can improve the mechanisms of that these bottom-up initiatives really get a space here and really are relevant also, not in international forums, but also at the national level. They feel they have an impact and they have some kind of representation and power in the decisions they are making. So good luck also in your intervention this afternoon at the plenary. And I would like maybe Isis, how you feel about this question.
Thanks for the invitation. Gracias por la invitación al gobierno de España. I brought the notes. From my experience and youth negotiation in COP28 and COP29, mindful that is not just about being present, but about having direct influence. For me, it's mean that young people, especially Latin American and women, can create policies, have a blending voice in decisions. This affects our present and our future. And their proposals are heard, integrated, and respected. It's not about veto power, but about intergenerational co-responsibility. And mindful that implicate access to information, prior training, resource to participate, and safe space to express ourselves without adult censorship or institutional colonialism. One of the big challenge is the structural inequality that aspect of youth. In Latin America, many young people face barriers to access to economic, geographic, gender, or indigenous and Afro-descendant communities affiliation. Furthermore, youth participation is often centralized in the global north. The negotiation is in English, and their meetings is not traduction and other language for many Latin American activists, the indigenous people, and others, is not the access to information. Another challenge is the lack of institutional mechanisms. that recognize our voice and legitimate and blending. For our voice to be representative, we need democratic selection process, climate policy training, and alliances with the state and multilateral actors who recognize the value of the advocacy. And finish my message will be clear. There is not climate justice without generation and gender justice. Young people are not the future, we are the present that it's already transforming the world. I will ask them to stop saying us the symbolic quota and begin integrating our strategic allies. We ask that the recognize we proposal as via the public policies include the official delegation and fund or participation equitably. I will also remind that the job participation is not optional, it's a right. Um, and the funding. Tremendous is a part to the 5% to CAF and OIJ. So many youth participation cannot be sustained with more goodwill or empathy rhetoric. I need a structural, fair, and sustained funding. Environmental educator and social entrepreneur and youth negotiator, you need funding, you need money. In Latin America is too much precarious circumstance with young people working with to pay, self-financing their travel and facing material barriers to influencing decision-making space. This not only limits the diversity of voice, but also perpetuate historical inequalities. And finish, in Latin American, the woman is the more vulnerabilities. So is the Lima negotiation, the gender negotiation, is very especially for me. These spaces are born from our struggles and stories and voice, having others speak for us, no matter how alike they may be. It's subtle from political disposition. We know what it means to the ground front and the climate crisis from the intersection and gender, territory, and equality. The Lima Roundtable represents milestone in the recognition the climate justice is not possible with gender justice. But this recognition must translate into action, and the action must be led by diverse women, indigenous, Afro-descendants, and others, rural, urban, young, etc. We don't want interpreters, we want influence. Defending the gender action plans means demanding funding, genuine mainstreaming in climate negotiation, and accountability mechanisms that include our voice from design to implementation. We don't just have the right to be at the table, we build the table, and that's why no one else should speak on our behalf. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Isis, and I think it's really relevant what we're just mentioning on how we need to change this, or we need to shift this idea of how participation and how this meaningful seat looks like. So also the perspective you gave on gender and how gender actions and gender action plans and accountability mechanisms are relevant to ensuring that even though what we were saying before, there are different layers of vulnerability a part of being children or a part of being a young person participating in political or civic spaces. So thank you for your intervention. So Kylo, what does a meaningful seat look for you?
Yes. I think perfect. Two amazing people to follow. I couldn't agree more. I think it's very much intergenerational and an intersectional approach that will bring us there, and then financing and funding is the vehicle. No? Thanks so much to COTA for having me, and to the ministry too. Always honoured to see our leading member organisations pushing it in these spaces. Caleb from the European Youth Forum, we're the largest body of youth organisations in the world, bringing together national youth councils and international non-governmental youth organisations. And on this one, for me, a meaningful seat, a meaningful form of participation obviously goes beyond symbolism. It goes beyond symbolism of just being present. It's defined by power, it's defined by structure, and it's fundamentally is defined by rights. Um, it looks somewhat like co-decision, perfect world. It looks like co-creation where young people are not just consulted but embedded in the institutional processes with mandates to shape outcomes in processes like we see in the EU sphere, like youth tests, where every piece of legislation is future-proof for young people, um, where the impacts are assessed on young people and future generations. And this is something we've long advocated for, but let's be clear on this point, and I'll link both of the points that you've made and take a step back from an institutional side and say let's be clear. The meaningful participation is not something that young people have to earn. It's a right. In a rights-based approach, we hold the rights as young people, and public institutions and public processes are the duty bearers of those rights. And it's their responsibility to co-create those structures with us. Of course, for us to apply that pressure, but at the same time for institutions to be responsive of the needs of future generations. And this also means, like you said, removing the barriers to participation. You cannot meaningfully engage in a process like UNFCCC, like COP30, if you can't afford rent, if your visa is denied, if you're juggling precarious work, or even in many cases, like we see, if your government is actively working against to hinder your actions and beliefs as you take action to mobilize as young people. Until basic economic, social, political, civic rights are protected, offering or saying that young people should be engaged without any real agency is just exclusion disguised as this form of empowerment. So I think a theme that many of us as young people have carried into this COP and COPs before is this idea of nothing for us without us. And I think fundamentally it's these conversations. It's the conversations between youth-led civil society at a local level, national level, regional level, and at a global level that ensure that we're equipped. So in short, I completely agree with my two colleagues on this panel, but we need to ensure that when we speak about participation, that it's not just this being present in the room, taken as a granted, but that it's a fundamental democratic right for young people to be included in these processes as a key stakeholder, not just beneficiaries of the policy that will be made, but co-creators of the future that we need.
Thank you, Kylon, for this very interesting perspective on the responsibility of public powers of ensuring the meaningful youth participation of young people in this cultural, political, economic, and social development of our countries and of the global political issues. So just like also and just handing over what you just mentioned on beyond being present and this intergenerational impact assessment on the youth test. So yeah, just give that idea because we want to take that before for a later conversation. So Marina, how does a meaningful seat look for you?
For me, a meaningful seat means three main things. It means power, process, and permanence. Power in the sense of real influence. Here I will take some views of my colleagues because having real influence means that government takes you serious. Also means having funds because without funds, youth participation evolves as a privileged thing and not as a real representative process. Process means being present before, during, and after the policy-making processes. Before, in form of a consultation to ensure that the policy reflects youth views and youth necessities. During the policy-making and the drafting of the laws of the text, so we make sure that governments take into account and that there is in the actual text our proposals and our needs. And after all this process, to make the governments and the legislators accountable and transparent to ensure clarity throughout the whole process. It also means permanence. We can't depend of the goodwill of politics, of negotiators, of governments. We need something permanent, institutionalized, something that we can rely on, that we are sure that we will have youth representation all along the process, independently for the political cycles. I would like to highlight that in Spain we have meaningful youth structures as the Spanish Youth Council, that is a permanent structure, an institutionalized structure with fundings and with a lot of representation and real power, meaningful participation. I would like to end talking a little bit about climate governance, global climate governance, because in the UNFCCC framework, youth participation should mean that we are in the work programs, in the formal channels that politics take us into account, that we receive formal feedback, not just something in a corridor, that we have a seat in the big table, not in the small ones made for youth washing and okay, we have little representation of youth. No, we want to be with the negotiators. We want to be in the big table. So a meaningful seat is one where if youth are not in the room, the policy is incomplete. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina, and also about this last idea of how public policies are incomplete without the voice of those who are being affected by them, and about this role of the Spanish Youth Council that you just mentioned of permanent legitimate structures to filter all the voices from different backgrounds, from international, well, national, non-governmental youth organizations and other regional youth councils. But we often see that there's these challenges in not only in global spaces but also at the national or local level. How do we make that these spaces are truly representative of global youth and not just the most privileged or vocal groups? It depends also on the participation or the structure of the youth organization we're talking about, but how do we ensure that we have this global and intersectional focus that Kylon was talking about? Given also that formal power within the UNFCCC rests with party delegations and state present here, what do you think are the most effective strategies for young people and youth organizations to ensure that our proposals are not just being heard but adopted by the official parties of this conference? How do we engage with the states and with the negotiators here? Kylon, you want to go first?
So on the first half of that question, I think it was about challenges. So I think the biggest challenge and barrier to participation that we see is access. Access to the rooms, access to negotiators, access to the seats. And what you said made me think of a quote a negotiator told me at my first COP, which was, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And it's an unfortunate reality for young people as they approach these processes. I remember it was back in Glasgow, and I can't imagine this being your first COP. Everything defined by agendas not being adopted for a couple of days, technical negotiations, very different conversations about financial obligations, if there even are conversations about financial obligations. And in your head you're going, okay, that's climate action. Addressing climate change is a technical problem. We know that that's not the full picture. The full picture is that right now, to have fundamental youth participation, it depends on time, it depends on money, it depends on passports, it depends on political safety, it depends on the holistic conditions around young people in a given society to be able to engage in these. Privileges that many young people, particularly in the global south, don't have. And I think the result of this then in COP processes is that we often have youth constituencies that are privileged, that that the most resource voices have the opportunity and the spaces. At COP30 we've seen this again. We've seen high costs, we've seen security restrictions, we've seen surveillance, we've seen crackdown on protests, heavy militarization, and I think a process structurally stacked nearly against young people to be able to engage. So that's the pessimistic side. What's the optimistic side? How do we solve that? What are the effective strategies? And I think you touched on it very well. I think it's coordination outside the rooms for influence inside the rooms. So it's looking at structures like the organizations that you all represent, democratic, youth-led, legitimate, independent from government youth organizations that are driven by, with, and for young people, that are the closest in touch with communities on the ground to see what young people actually need. So we need to build the knowledge, the networks. European Youth Forum, I'll make the small plug there, but similarly across on an intergenerational basis. We spoke about this yesterday. We've recently launched the second call for our AU-EU Youth Action Labs, which is a partnership between the European Youth Forum and Oxfam, where we're building the capacity of not only youth organizations that have youth-led organizations that have come forward in the African Union, but also the capacity of youth-led organizations in the European Union to have this global perspective, to have this inter-regional knowledge, and to be able to come into these rooms. And I see beside my name it says Ireland there. To not just come into a room from a rural Irish perspective, not just come into a room from the perspective of the European Youth Forum, but to be able to bring these global perspectives and have the network there, that once we're in the room, to be able to shape it. Then secondly, I think it goes to the point that many of us made previously, which is about demanding structural change. I think we clearly see that the structure in place this minute at the UNFCCC is not making the progress that we need. We see this through the NDCs, we see this through all the calculations on a 1.5 degrees Celsius future. We see this on the tracking of the financial obligations that we're waiting to see a Baku to Belém roadmap to hopefully have that 1.3 trillion. But I think as well, from a young person's perspective, it's about these institutionalized roles, these institutionalized seats that aren't just seen as a political addition, political extra, but as a fundamental part of actually future-proofing these processes. So the decisions that are made here are truly going to have a positive impact and can be carried on by the next generation of leaders. And unfortunately, when we say next generation of leaders, that actually means us, so that we have these safeguarded spaces for civil society, youth-led civil society. So I think the parting message on this front is that that youth presence isn't youth participation, that as the influence of young people grows, that's primarily been down to us pushing on the sidelines, that it's important that we forcibly shift the paradigms of institutions so that for them, they don't just believe that they've met us and they've heard our concerns, but that fundamentally we've made the case and we've shown that, like I said earlier, that it's a democratic right for us to be involved in these processes.
Thank you. Yes, see. Thank you, Kaelon, for your intervention. And I would like to just take something you just mentioned, which hasn't been mentioned before, and I think it's highly relevant on the different challenges and barriers that young people are facing, apart from the funding that Pupo and Isis were just mentioning, but about this, the political risks that young people often also face in some regions, and where their voices need to be upheld the most. So I would like to also recall on what you mentioned, and I feel it's very important on coordinating outside the meeting rooms, how we can build networks that really do have this intergenerational and intersectional perspective, and have this common idea of that we are fighting for intergenerational justice, that is shared responsibilities to building a better world for everyone. So thank you, Kaelon, for your intervention. Marina?
Yes, I would like to elaborate more in the idea of how we influence the negotiators or the people who are taking the decisions, we need to play a strategic role as youth, and a strategic and also a double role as civil society and youth delegates if we apply for it. We need to pressure, but we need to be intelligent. I mean, we need to speak their language. We can send a proposal, an abstract proposal. We can't do a statement claiming for more funds. We need to do the work for them. We need to give them the structure of the funds that we need and how can we obtain them. We need to speak their language so they feel more comfortable and so we are taken serious. We need also to form alliance, a strategic alliance, so we can make greater pressure. We need to talk with structures that are already done, as Django, for example, that is the constituency of youth and children. So we can make a coalition with them and pressure more and more governments. Also, we need to talk with every single constituency and parties. Maybe it's not our country, but if it's a strategic friend of our country, we can make greater pressure. We need to be intelligent. It's not only about participating, it's about participating with a purpose. So just we need to start playing also their game so we can have a seat again on the big table.
Thank you, Marina, for this very interesting approach also on meaningful participation and also I think about representation. Like you don't usually participate by yourself and represent your own ideas, but with this idea of coordination that it's about representation of shared values. So, Pupu, how do you build on that?
Thank you. Yeah, I was thinking just about this, like not only about meaningful participation, but profound and representative participation. Because I think a part of tokenism is something that has happened a lot in the UN for the last years, which is like inviting, inspiring youth to give a speech. And in what capacity is this young people giving the speech? Because as we know, youth is quite a broad concept, and opinion of one young person, it doesn't mean that it represents more than that person's perspective. So I think there is a long way on that. And I believe that we need to be strategical on what we do and very pragmatic on also understanding the UN and seeing the windows of opportunity for us to jump in and to have this meaningful participation. First thing, I think we need to fight this idea that have one young people with a very inspiring story on the conference that makes everybody feel like emotion and remember, oh, yeah, youth is important. Look at this inspiring message of someone who fought poverty and now can speak in a conference. This is important, but this is not the kind of participation that we need. And the constituency of the UN, we are a system of countries. And this is very important for us to understand. I think it's not revolutionary to defend and to fight for youth quotas in the delegations, because this is the kind of youth that we need. We don't need random youth. We don't need youth from NGOs representing only the interests of this specific group. We need the opinion and the constructive voice of the youth of this country. I think looking to Spain is very interesting, and in Brazil we also have a youth council, which is this structure that tries to get everybody on the table, all the youth movements, and to form common statements and policies. We as an intergovernmental organization, as the OIJ is, I can speak on my behalf and have my own opinions on the issues, but to have a meaningful participation, I need to bring the opinion that was built together with the countries that are a member of my organization. The same as the European Youth Forum. I think these kind of forums are very important. and we miss these kind of spaces. And I think even within the UN, the structures that we have for youth are not enough. NGOs are overrepresented, and official youth bodies are not represented in the space as they should. So I think we need to keep building and forging networks to have more common and collective opinions on the issues that are discussed, and we need to fight for representative youth participation in a way that the voices that are heard are not only tokens of one youth, one organization, one issue, but are built from the collective expression of the different youth organisms and the youth opinions. In English it's difficult because the word youth doesn't have a plural. In Spanish we say juventudes, not only juventud, because there are many opinions within the youth. And to have the opportunity to have a stronger voices, we need to forge the spaces where we can agree on statements and ways forward, and we're lacking this kind of space between the UN. And just to finish on that, I think the issue of the legitimacy of the multilateralism right now, it also has to do with this. We need to have a more representative opinion from youth in these spaces, and this is part of revigorating and renewing the belief of our generation in multilateralism. Enough with showcasing individual stories. We need to have a more representative voice of the youth in international spaces.
Thank you for pointing it out. That's something we have also been pushing the UN Youth Office to start integrating in how these constituencies and these youth movements around the UN mechanisms are relevant to bring both youth movements and individual young voices into not only UNFCCC but every UN mechanisms in the General Assembly, in some other conferences for financing for development. In Sevilla there was also a young constituency bringing these voices, but about how if parties who are part of the UN and who are part of the UN bodies, how do we make that young people are actually integrated in the voices representing the countries before UN mechanisms. So that's something we'd like to keep working on. I think that the European Youth Forum is also building on the United Nations UN Youth Rights Convention, which is also part of how we build structures that are relevant and representative of youth voices and defend youth rights. So Isis, how do you feel about what our panelists have already mentioned?
It's a crucial to begin institutionalizing youth participation through an organized, participatory and democratic process. Despite all the progress made 5 years after the creation of the Youth Negotiator Program, many Latin American countries were unable to continue their program this year due to funding issues. Chile is one of the affected countries. Youth participation cannot depend on the government in power. It must be a guarantee. It's a right. For participation to be truly inclusive and transformative, state, multilateral organization, and the private sector must invest in young people, in training, infrastructure, scholarship to attend international negotiation, and the strengthening of the youth organization. We cannot demand influence without guarantees identify conditions for exercise. Funding youth participation is not an expense. It's necessary to investment in democracy and climate justice and the future. And the women participation or women indigenous participation in this space is very, very difficult. In Latin American, the woman defender is more. Yeah, it's a murder. It's very difficult. Is activists and social environmental defenders in Latin America, and this space protect me, the visibility, my voice, my people, my country. So it's very important this space, but not the participation for. Okay, sorry. So my English was very good. So, but the woman participation is very important in this COP. In the negotiation to Lima today, it's a men decisions. Iran, India, and the other countries, men is negotiation in gender, not women. Is very very difficult the comprehensive this. So in Latin America, the woman defends rights, the woman defends water, the woman defends tree, etc.
Thank you, Isis, and that you brought up this concept of democracy also in your intervention. I think it's a nice way to kind of like wrap up what has already been mentioning on representative participation and building also on democracy. So to wrap up this panel and also to see if anybody from the public has anything to add or to ask our panelists, just very briefly, if you could deliver one key message to heads of delegation or to senior negotiators here at COP, what would it be? Just very short, so we can open the floor for discussion. Only one and a half. Do you like to go?
5% for youth.
I may say, stop treating us like kids, please.
You can elaborate a little bit more. I was joking.
I'll go technical with this one to help both of us. Couple the financial negotiations, the climate finance negotiations with what's happening in Nairobi at the minute at the UN Tax Convention. Open up new ways to revenue and to fund just transition that includes young people, that centres young people, that's underpinned by intergenerational justice through public funds, not relying on the private sector to deliver on the failure of governments.
Investment in the youth is investment in democracy.
Thank you. So we would now like to ask, we're opening the floor to the public of this panel. So if there's anybody who would like to add something, just ask something of what has been mentioned on structures, on meaningful youth participation here at the UNFCCC or in other UN mechanisms. Yeah.
Now? Yeah, hold on. Yeah, thank you so much. This was a really wonderful panel. I'm really glad that I came to listen to it. So I'm Gabriel. I'm working on PhD. Part of it is actually the democratization of the UNFCCC. So I've been talking to a lot of people who are really worried about efficiency and the legitimacy of the process, and they've been asking for many kinds of reforms, like shifting to majority vote, rules of conflict of interest to deal with the fact that we have like, 1,600 lobbyists walking around these halls, issues with militarization of like security to deal with protests, like crackdowns and so on. And so you've all kind of touched on this already in like your responses, but I wanted to hear all at once. What are some particular reforms that you would all like to see from the UNFCCC to kind of institutionalize meaningful representative youth participation? Like how would you in particular think that the things that you would like to see to make
I'll give you three. First one is mandate youth representation in party delegations. Two, apply a youth test to all decisions and outcomes of UNF 333 processes. And I'm happy to follow up and share. We have a position paper on youth tests, which outlines the process of not only analysis, risk assessment, but also inclusion of young people in the process. And then finally, I'd say when decisions are reached, to have clear obligations and follow-up mechanisms to ensure delivery on particularly financial obligations and agreements.
I would add two more things. I think it's a permanent structure for the PYCC. I think this is a very important role that we have within the COP, and that is very important. And the other thing is we need to start to translate better the language of the UNFCCC to youth. And there is a big gap on that, on what youth is doing in their territories and the language that is being discussed here. And if we have specific space for youth in the party delegations, this could be a bridge to a better and representative participation of youth in the process. There is a bridge needed on that, and I think we can have some solutions on that.
Would you like to add something? I would also like to say, I'm just very in line with what Kylon was mentioning. The youth test does have these two pillars of bringing a meaningful youth participation to the table, and that can be done with what's already been done on making or mandating that young people are part of party delegations, a part of coming as NGOs, civil society, which also helps legitimize the process of the UNFCCC, let's say. So having civil society here also brings momentum and also makes party delegations accountable for what they are discussing here. But also it's important to bring them inside party delegations. And on the other side, what Kylon was already mentioning, of this other pillar of impact assessment, intergenerational impact assessment on young people. So yeah, not just only on the public policies that are going to be developed from here. We know decisions that are made here are later to be implemented at the national level. So how we can maybe guide also how the implementation, and we know how hard it is, no, for some countries to kind of understand that this national implementation is mandated by what has been discussed here, but how we can make this something that really gets to the ground and to grassroots youth movements and youth organizations. So I think having these two pillars in mind of how young people need to be present in delegations, a part of around civil society mechanisms to legitimize the process, but at the same time, not only the public processes that are going to be developed from here, but how we can make an impact assessment of the ones that are already in place. Those are already mechanisms and public policies that are going to impact on a better way or in a less better way the future young people. So how we do this impact assessment on public policies.
Yeah, and I think maybe one other piece that could be useful is I spoke a lot earlier about like a rights-based approach to how we deal with the climate crisis. I'd recommend taking a look at the International Court of Justice advisory opinion that's relevant. It's the World Coalition for Climate Justice that really leads the advocacy in these spaces on it. Great organization that are equipping and making young people aware of the rights that they have to a healthy future. So if you haven't reached out to them yet, I'd definitely reach out to them. It's I think it's a paradigm that we need to be talking at, rather than seeing if we deliver, that we have to deliver because of our legal obligations.
Should I ask something, or is there anything else from the public?
Okay, quickly, thank you for all your words. I would like to ask, as it's my first COP, two things that are coming to my mind all the time. Firstly is, how do you feel when everyone around here, they tell us we are the future. Like, oh, it's so nice that you are here, as you are the future, but it seems like they are not taking account that we are here right now trying to impact in this politics. Like, I don't know if you have the same feeling here. And the other question that is coming to my mind that is why we have the pressure to defend future generations and not the others one also, right? Because I always feel like they are treating the young people as we are the main defenders on future generations, and there is no pressure on the rest of the world, right? So it's just, what are your feelings on these 2 points? Thank you.
I would say that the first thing when I hear, you are the future, I think we need to fight back this narrative from the moment. We are not the future, we are the present. The future are the future generations. We are already feeling the impact of the climate change and the chaos in our lives. We are the first generation that needs to project our own trajectory within this context. So it generally comes with I'm younger, I'm longer, I still young. I think we need to defend the categories, and we need to defend the category of youth. And for us, youth is not future, youth is our present, youth is present, and future, we're talking about the future generations. And I think there is a very important concept, which is the intergenerational justice and intergenerational pact. They are the past, sorry, we are the present, and when we, children and the future generations are the future. And I think those concepts need to be in place for us to have a right conversation. In the same way, when they say like, I still feel young, it's not about feeling young. Youth is a category of this specific range of age where we are living in, and the impact on our rights and our possibilities and our abilities in this moment of our lives is very important to fight inequality and to build a different future. So we need to defend our concepts of youth, and that would be my take on that.
From my side, I completely agree. Everyone born right now is the present. They have to deliver, or else we're just backsliding. So I maybe answer the second part to that first question, which is about what to do when they don't take you seriously. This is going to happen often. This is something that I faced a lot, and I found more so this COP. There's a very realist approach by most of the EU actors in particular, where it's very much, we need pragmatic solutions, we're doing our piece, we're doing enough, now it's up to the rest of the countries to do their piece. So what I'll often put back to them is, well, a significant proportion of your voter base is young people, so therefore you have to deliver for them. Secondly, the political people coming up against you and challenging you are primarily going to be young people, because we're the most active generation politically that we've seen on record. And then similarly, all the issues that we're talking about, housing, energy, this kind of intergenerational piece you said, housing, energy, transport, mobility, safety, all of these pieces cross-cut every generation. And we need intergenerational solutions. So fundamentally, every discussion that they have needs to be in a way that we're not just talking to this one constituency, young people, but we're talking to this really informed, well-prepared, uber mobilized group of society that's ready to act. So my final piece would be, the one piece that I've really pushed in the bilaterals I've had, we've been fortunate to meet commissioners, ministers, different negotiators, is I won't leave the meeting without some sort of an outcome or a follow-up. Whether, I remember there was one minister yesterday where we were trying to find that kind of in to see how we'd follow up, and we found out that he, involved minorly on the just transition negotiations, and he was struggling with one piece of text where he wasn't sure how to frame it, but he believed in gender equality, he believed in intersectionality, he was well in line with our youth rights approach. So we've now drafted him language, and we're going to deliver it sometime today when I get a break from side events and things. So it's about finding those gaps and then being ready to bounce. Because at this COP, the delegation sizes are much smaller. Everyone from even the EU brings 60, 70. This year they've 25. Member states, I know there's member states in the EU have 2 or 3 negotiators here on site. These are people who are limited in capacity and are actually quite happy and more susceptible than ever before I've seen to taking things on. And then you have the other question of what role fossil fuel lobbyists are going to play. And I think young people have the ability to overpower that. We have to overpower that, and we need to come with solutions. So show up well informed, show up looking for an outcome, and show up with a very realist approach where you've got the percentage of young people that they're representing in their positions.
Thank you, Kylum, and I don't know if anybody else wants to wrap up. If not, I think we can close up this panel, and I would just like to respond to Paula and close this panel that how we can also make that this mitigation and adaptation negotiations that are going on about what you were just mentioning on future generations and young people being the only ones kind of like thinking on a long-term scope. This short-term decision, the crisis of multilateralism is affecting the outcomes of United Nations processes, and young people do have this perspective to think ahead and to think on this long-term perspective. So how being part of the party delegation and having a real impact in the process leading up to COP might help also parties coming up here and negotiate with this long-term perspective. So I think that's also relevant. So I think we can close up and wrap up this panel, and we would like to just state and defend that we will continue to defend that there cannot be climate justice and climate policies without real youth participation, without funding for youth movements, grassroots organizations, so that they can research, that they can propose, and that they can monitor independently. Without climate education, without demanding action and defending our human rights to a healthy, clean, and sustainable environment, and without permanent dialogue structures between youth movements, youth organizations, and governments. I would also just like you to have a look. We brought some flyers on the work we did on the youth test and our intergenerational impact report. So we will leave them over there at the end of the room. So just happy to have a chat on this. It's one of the biggest, I think, not just projects but initiatives that EU member states are trying to implement now. I know the EU institutions, the European Economic and Social Committee, the European Commission is now working on that and the intergenerational fairness strategy. So we would really like to take this moment also to think about these 2 pillars of youth participation, of being present and being able to represent movements and structures that build up our intersectional approach, and how also we do this impact assessment on current and future public policies on the climate crisis and every public policy in general. So thank you for being here with us. Young people are already leading, transforming and inspiring climate change, and we count with all of you to make progress in this COP. So thank you.
Can we get a big thank you for Seote as well, and Angel and all the team?